Good evening, friends, and welcome to another Monday night introduction to U.S. Government Civics 101. Hope everybody's doing well. We've got Triple G, Pat Butler. Oh, I'm in here too. Wow. Phaoxerus and Diana too. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Did everybody get a chance to see the interview? When was that? Was that Saturday or Sunday? It was Saturday evening on Pennsylvania Preparedness channel. Small channel, less than 1,000 guys. Watch him. He's got I like his style. I like what he's trying to do. He is. I'm starting to wheeze. He is very stoic in the fact that he wants to bring people together, and I think that's what an admirable thing. And so if we can, let's help him bring people together, because we've got way too much division. Just one second. Let me see if I can't get some air into my lungs. I thought I had that all taken care of before the show. Oh, well. But anyhow, some exciting discussions. We're going to kind of go back and relook the First Amendment. We are on page 156 right now of the high school senior civics book that I got for my grandchildren in case I needed to homeschool them in the event of SHTF. So that's kind of what we're using, and some really good stuff I didn't get covered when we talked about it at the very beginning. So this is, I was going to bypass it until I started reading it, and I go, wow, this is some neat stuff that we need to really take a look at. Utah Mike, Little Lone Prepper, wow, Holly, and gosh, okay, great. We're getting some great people. We're up to 10. So let's see. Let's start off first with, I want to clarify what I believe is the ultimate, or at least the intermediate goal of the open borders. We always talk about the vote, but it's not necessarily the vote. This has caused a lot of racial tension in the U.S., but it's not the vote. That may be an ultimate desire and an end desire. Hello, Jack. Welcome. But I think there's an intermediate desire. I was just getting ready to do it on my cell phone, and then I noticed that we needed. Let me do a real quick mathematical computation here. We've got 8 million supposedly illegal aliens. 1, 2, 3, divided by 30,000 equals. All right. So let's get into this. Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons. So it doesn't give a race, a color, or anything else. It just says free persons, including those bound to service for a number of years, indentured servants, and excluding Indians not taxed and 3/5 of all other persons. Okay, so it's not saying that somebody is less than. It's just saying, hey, we have a voting population. Okay, now if you're a voter, if you're somebody who is eligible to vote and make decisions, you get a full count towards representation. If you are not an eligible voter, then you get 3/5 of a representative, or 3/5 of that enumeration. So you're going to have, instead of 30,000, you're going to have basically 50,000 of those to get one representative. So if that's the case, but now that was superseded by the 17th Amendment, Article 2. Let me find it here real quick. Article 17, Amendment 17, Article 2, Section 2. Section 2, 17th Amendment. Where are you? XVII. There we go. No, it's the 14th. What am I thinking? 14th Amendment, Section 2. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state. So After the Civil War, it was modified so that there was no more 3/5 rule. Everybody, voter and non-voter, counts in the census. You take that census and divide it by 30,000, and that's the number of representatives that you have. So if we've allowed 8 million, and that's a low number, illegal aliens into our country over the course of the last 3 years, that means that the next census, there's going to be 267 additional U.S. representatives in Congress, okay? Now, where are these people going? These people are going into sanctuary cities who are already left-leaning, right? So that's just going to give us 267 more liberal representatives so that the House will never be swayed away from the left. It will always remain in the hands of the left because of this numerical evaluation of persons in the U.S. and the numerical valuation for determining how they get representation. Does that make sense? Am I kind of so here's the simple answer, Jack. I got two simple answers because I used to work in this field. I was working at the homeless shelter as the HR director. So number one is they get a lot of stuff issued to them at the border. So when they're being processed, then put on the bus, they already have, in some cases, a Visa card, and a matriculation card, a cell phone, whatever, right? And that's supposed to be so we can track them. And then they're given a court date to appear 2-3 years in the future. And then we put them on a bus and ship them out. Now, some places, sanctuary cities like New York City, give them additional stuff. So you get off the bus. These are the two control points. They register when they come across the border or when we process them, put them on the bus, then when they exit the bus. So when they exit the bus, they're exiting the bus at a control point. Whichever reception, New York City, Chicago, Detroit, whatever, receives them, they process them, okay? So they bring them into this hall, they give them their cell phone, they give them their $5,000 Visa card, they give them a piece of paper and say, go to this address, okay? Now, everything is dependent upon people being honest and doing what they're supposed to do and keeping their word. The minute that they receive that cell phone, that $5,000 Visa card, or prepaid Visa card and all that kinds of stuff, they're free to do whatever they want to do, and they're gone. So now we can't find them. So that's how you have the disconnect between we can find them to give them stuff, but we can't find them to evict them. Okay, that's a terrible thing. So who is coming in from Merritt? Edith Wallace, welcome. Good evening. That's a new name. I hope that you enjoy us and you stay with us. We have some fantastic people in the chat. And I think you'll get a lot from watching the chat and making sure you communicate with them as well. We have two who are not U.S. citizens. We have Jack here. He'll Summit Homestead. He's out of Australia. Excuse me. I hope I didn't blow your ears out. I tried to get it covered. And then the other one's going to be Sue Me, who usually shows up, and she's out of Canada. So I thought the representatives were allotted per each 750,000 persons. So let's go back to Amendment 14, Section 2. No, it did not change the number. So that portion of it still stays the same, which is under Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3. If I can go back to where that is. Let me see if I can't find that. And Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3 says, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound for service, for a term of years, and including Indians not taxed, 3/5. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years and 30,000. Okay. So I don't see a change to that, but you could be. And so if you want to look that up, I'm certainly not going to say that I'm 100% correct, but if you have something otherwise, please share that. So anyhow, that's where we are. I just think that what they're doing is they're packing the population so that they can add more representatives for their side, and then eventually those representatives are going to have them vote. But what we're finding out is the more we're not a homogenous country, we're a heterogeneous country, and so we see these enclaves, and we're seeing the enclaves of some particular groups up in the Detroit, Michigan area, things like that. What Wisconsin just changed their flag so that it looks more like a Somali flag. I mean, these people are not integrating into our society. They're causing these enclaves, and within those enclaves, they're setting themselves aside from. And I think that's the bad part, that they didn't think about bringing all these people in. Was we had an automatic assumption people wanted to come here for being here, not for coming here to recreate what they left. And so, I think that's part of the dilemma. Second one, I don't know if you heard it today or not, but the Supreme Court did come down with a decision, a 9-0 decision. Those are very rare that you see 9-0. However, the 4 liberal justices all wrote an opinion that, although they concurred, gave a slightly different reason why, and they were upset that the Supreme Court decided some things above and beyond what was to be decided. But anyhow, basically what it said was, this is very, very specific in how we elect people, and the states cannot control federal elections. Now, I'm disappointed, having read it, that they didn't go further and say, if we're going to use the 14th Amendment and say that you can't be on the ballot because you participated in an insurrection, that we don't say we are a country where you have to be convicted, not accused. And so right now we don't have that conviction. All we have is an accusation. And, so that portion of whether or not he's even eligible for what do they call it? Indictment is that's the next series in the Supreme Court decisions, and they have to deliver that. Remember, the Supreme Court goes on their 3-month break right after July 4th, right after that. So that's going to be on a Wednesday. I think July 1st this year is on a Thursday. And so that means that they'll probably shut down the week before. So if that's the case, then we probably need that decision handed down no later than, Monday is the 1st. So their session officially ends on the 30th. So that means that's a Sunday. So we should expect to see that in June. June 28th would be that decision as to whether or not they can even indict him. And, that's going to be kind of an interesting case as well. So, but anyhow, I would have liked for them to have reiterated that a person is not subject to the law until you're convicted, or at least not subject to that definition of the law until they're convicted, not just simply accused. Okay, so let's go into some of the weird ones about limiting freedom of speech. And let me catch up with comments. Pepper Book Club, I think it's ridiculous that, if not treasonous, to give illegals money out of the Treasury. I have to agree. It's terrible that we're spending more on our illegal alien friends than we are on our own citizens. And we're supposed to be taking care of our citizens. Gosh, did I miss that much? I missed a whole bunch of comments. I am so sorry. Let me see here. Edith Wallace. Well, Edith, we hope to see a lot more of your chat because your opinion really matters to us. We appreciate it when you express. And sometimes, I was talking to a guy after church last Sunday, and one of the things that I don't think we do enough of is we just don't listen. And, we were talking about illegal aliens and the invasion into our country. And he came up with a point, and I said, you know what? You're right. I've never thought of that. That's an interesting point. That's another direction that I hadn't considered in the past. Somebody has a piece of information or a perspective or a point of view that I have not thought of, that you have not thought of. So Every piece of information is valuable in helping us make an informed and wise decision. So every piece of information we can get and every opinion we can get is valid and important to us. And that's the way we have to be if we're going to get through this together. We did have problems. I'm going to agree with you, and I'm going to disagree with you. The vast majority of them did participate in the last census, and there was an awful lot of effort going out there saying we are not looking for you to extradite you, because the perception that had been in the past was that if they participated in the census, we would know where they were, so we could pick them up and extradite them. So a lot of them hid from the census so that they could not be included in it because they were afraid we were just going to pick them up and throw them out. So there's that aspect of it too. So there's two parts to that. But I think all in all, you're probably right. I think things are getting a little bit better that way. Come on, mouse. Let me see here. Edith says that she follows Pennsylvania Prepper as well. Flew in from New Eagle, Pennsylvania. Wow. Let me see, Pat. I don't even know where that is. I do know I did some work for Pennsylvania Electric Company. And at the time, they had 3 nuclear power plants. They had Limerick, which was the last nuclear power plant put online. That was in between Reading and King of Prussia. And then I did some work at Peach Bottom Nuclear Power Plant, and that's on the Maryland, Pennsylvania border. That was the very first commercial nuclear power plant that was put online. And then, of course, the third one that they own is 3 Mile Island on the Schuylkill River. And I believe it was a Schuylkill. But that's the only one we've had an accident at, or an almost accident. So that was an interesting time. I enjoyed my time in Pennsylvania. Definitely, I love the 4 seasons. We don't have that here in Texas. And then I also spent some time in California. In California, the way you tell what season it is the color of the ice. What do you call it? Ice plant on the side of the road. If it's green, it's summer or winter, and if it's brown, it's summer. But in Monterey, at least, it was a consistent 68 degrees almost all the time. Yeah. Oh, and Jack, I saw that you guys are having some real bad wildfires as well. So we've got wildfires right now here in Texas, in Arkansas, in the Ozarks in Arkansas. They've got 4 new fires have just broken up there. And then I saw that is it Queensland that is having some really bad fires in Australia as well. They're talking about that here. Can a person earn their citizenship by becoming a member of the military? I was talking to a friend, Triple G, I think, and Triple G, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it you that saw a busload of guys in uniform coming down from basic training, going down to San Antonio to become medics, but none of them spoke English? That they were all illegals? Let me get rid of this. Somebody said it, and I think it was Triple G. I could be wrong, but yeah. So we're letting them into our military, and they're trying to do the same thing so that they can basically earn their citizenship. Let me see here. Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing, Ms. Wallace, is I agree with you. I think that we're going to have a whole bunch of little Portugals, little China's, little Chinatowns and everything else all throughout the country, and that's terrible. What we would really like to be is we'd like to be more homogenous. We'd like to be more integrated. But I was watching the news earlier this evening, and the New York is trying to bus the illegal populations, a lot of the illegal population they have in New York City, out to Albany and Buffalo and a couple other places. And they were interviewing one of the people, and they said they didn't want to go because their children don't speak English. And so they wanted to stay in a Spanish-speaking community in New York rather than going to another community where they and their children won't be accepted because they don't speak the language. And I was thinking, you know what? You should have thought about that. You should learn the language if you want to come here for that purpose. If you want to come here for a better life, learn the language. Although Texas is a bilingual state. So Texas does have, our Constitution allows for everything to be done both in English and Spanish. And that's because we were a former Mexican colony or territory. Oh, by the way, today's the 4th. So for those of you who don't know, Texas Independence Day was March 2nd, day before yesterday. And so that's something we celebrate here. Thank you, Phyaxerus. Okay, so Phyaxerus looked it up and he found it. So it's not delineated in the Constitution. So thank you for doing that. It says per 30,000. So, but it also gives Congress the authority to do what Phyaxerus has found for us. So thank you very much for finding that for us. I greatly appreciate it. So that, I guess what that would do is it would just change the districting, the redistricting of it. If the actual number of representatives is limited now, then how they are or what areas they represent, those boundaries could change as we try to get more and more people represented. They aren't, Holly. They're going bankrupt, and that's one of the main things we're experiencing here in Texas. Yeah, they've shut down schools in New York to house them. That's absolutely true, or at least that's what I've heard. Idaho Insider, welcome, good evening, and thank you for joining us. We're happy you're here with us. Okay, so that's kind of where we are on those two topics I wanted to topic up. Now we're going to get into page 157 of Mr. Sabato's book, American Government and Freedoms of Speech in the Press. So first, let's go back and let's talk about freedom of speech. And so, is it absolute or is it not? And that's a question that we have to constantly ask ourselves about the First Amendment: is it absolute or not? So, if we have to go back as far back as 1797, 1798, and actually, well, the First Amendment was ratified in 1791. Then in 1798, we came out with the Alien and Sedition Act. So part of that was they didn't want people speaking up against the newly formed government, okay, especially the Democrat Party in the government. So they passed this law that says you can't speak up against the government. Wait a minute. This is only 6 years after the First Amendment was passed, and we're already starting to limit speech, especially what we didn't want, which was the whole reason why we passed the First Amendment. And that was we wanted our citizens to be able to speak up against their government. So that had to go through several juxtapositions. And finally, it was done away with in 1800. And so, but we did have that first attempt to prohibit our citizens from speaking up against our government. Then, of course, we had the 1860s and slavery and everything else. You had the people who were speaking up, the abolitionists, you had the people who were anti-abolitionists, all kinds of things. That started a lot more of that contentious discussion among the politicians and everything else. Then in 1917, let me get here. So the next major national efforts to restrict freedom of speech and freedom of the press didn't occur until Congress, at the urging of President Wilson during World War I, passed the Espionage Act in 1917. Nearly 2,000 Americans were convicted for violating its various provisions, especially those who made it illegal to urge resistance to the draft. So if you were an anti-draft person and spoke up and said you were anti-draft, according to the 1917 Alien and Sedition Act, you could be imprisoned for speaking up against the draft. We had a reiteration of that in the late 60s during Vietnam, and we'll get into that. But, that's kind of, you couldn't speak up against it. So then in 1920, after 20,000 people have been put in jail, then in 1919, Schenck versus the United States, the Supreme Court upheld this act, ruling that Congress had a right to restrict speech of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. So basically what it did was it said, no, you can speak up against the government as long as you're not taking an active role in trying to overthrow it with your comments. So, they're trying to define this. Where is that middle ground of you have a right to speak up, but not to the point to where you are doing things that are anti-U.S., trying to overthrow it, or being violent or something like that. So then we started coming up with limiting prior restraint. In the Alien and Sedition Act, the U.S. Supreme Court did not take a firm position on the issue until 1970s, which was Neer versus Minnesota and the New York Times versus the U.S. in 1971, also called the Pentagon Papers case, for those of you who don't remember it. So what happened was somebody leaked a whole bunch of classified information from the Pentagon to the New York, the New York Times. And so the government said, you can't print that because that's classified information. They said, well, we don't know that. And so they tried to throw the editor of the New York Times in jail, and it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, no, freedom of the press. If they get it, whatever means they get it by, they can print it. And so that became one of those hallmark cases. I agree with you, Theoxorus. Yes, they have suppressed our dissent. If you're not part of that, of their genre, then you certainly, they stifle it. I did a video earlier today, a short, and I was talking about, it was said, and this was one of the jokes that they used to tell in Russia, but they said, конечно, вы можете поговорить как хотите, лишь бы было имя на бюллетене. So what that means is, of course you can vote how you want to, as long as the name is on the ballot. So that was how democracy was defined in Russia. And I gave some other examples of some other people that, were the only name on the ballot. So is removing a name from the ballot really democratic? And people are saying that has to be done. That name has to be removed in order to save democracy. So we're going to destroy democracy in order to save democracy. That doesn't make sense to me. But, then again, I'm just a poor boy whose vision's often told. Okay, anyhow, I am just a poor boy. Simon and Garfunkel, 1970, The Boxer. But in the end of the first stanza, it has one of my favorite lines of any philosopher, and I'm going to call Paul Simon a philosopher, and he says, man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. And I think that's a very appropriate thing for even our society today. So then we had freedom of the press and Nebraska Press Association versus Stewart. Any attempts by the government to prevent expression carried a heavy presumption against its constitutionality. So basically, freedom of the press is almost explicit that they can publish pretty much anything they want. Now, let me see here. Jack says, there was no corporate law when the Constitution was written. In this day and age, corporations don't fall under the federal Commonwealth Constitution as they fall under corporate law. Here in the U.S., we've had a Supreme Court decision here just recently in the last, I'm going to say within the last 15 years, that, and President Obama was really upset over it, but it declared corporations as entities, as people. So they are, corporations are now subject to the same limitations and restrictions and guarantees and rights as provided by individuals in the Constitution. So what was the name of that case? That was, I know President Obama was, I forget the name of the case, but President Obama was really upset about that. Okay, symbolic speech. So what happened was, people were wearing that certain red, white, and black armband during just before World War II in support of that guy in Germany. And then there were other things that people were doing right after 1917, after the Velika Oktyabrskaya Revolucja, the Great October Revolution. There were a lot of Americans who were sympathetic and wore the red armbands. And so it was decided that those people were treasonous. And so therefore they could be charged under the Alien and Sedition Act. And so what they did was they took it to the Supreme Court. Izzy, just a minute, sweetheart. My 15-year-old Chihuahua wants something. Oh, she wants up on the couch. Just 1 second. I should have brought her over and showed her to you. She's a 5-pound, long-haired Chihuahua, 15 years old. She can't, her back legs are going bad, so she can't get up the stairs that I bought for her anymore or anything like that. So I have to put her up on and take her off of the couch. Okay, so the Supreme Court first acknowledged that symbolic speech was entitled to First Amendment protection in Stromberg versus California. This is 1931. This is the red armband in support of communism. There, the court overturned a communist youth camp director's conviction under a state statute prohibiting the display of the red flag, a symbol that they considered to be in opposition to the U.S. government. In a similar vein, the right of high school students to wear black armbands to protest the Vietnam War was upheld in Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District in 1969. So having certain things, symbols that you wear on your body that may be in opposition to other things, having that symbol, that picture, that statement on your body is considered protected, just as is speech. So those are what those two Supreme Court decisions did. I've heard arguments both ways, Stray Kitten. I'm not smart enough to give you a definitive answer on that. Maybe somebody here. James Wesley Rawls. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff, but he certainly seems to think that we are chartered. That there are two different charters, one of them as a country and the other as a corporation. And if you read his stuff, he can argue that there is a corporation. I don't know. I read it. I'm not convinced, but at the same time, that's not my area of expertise. So I'm gonna plead ignorance, if you don't mind. Maybe somebody else here has got a good answer. So Jack says that he's kind of agreeing with me, possibly both. Let me see. Can't try to catch up. Gosh, you guys are doing a lot of talk. You guys are talking more than I am. That's great. Okay, there we go. Okay, hate speech. As a thumbnail summary of the last 2 or 3 decades of speech issues in the Supreme Court, Harry Calvin Jr. in 1966 said, "We may come to see the Negro as winning back for us the freedoms the communists seem to have lost for us." So basically, they thought that the freedom of speech, or hate speech, and the limiting of that had been taken away because of our anti-communist stance, and then it was allowed to exist towards the minority population. And so that kind of bubbled its way up, of course, through the civil rights movement of the late 1960s and early 70s. And so then we started getting into what we consider hate speech. In the 1990s, a particularly thorny First Amendment issue emerged as cities and universities attempted to prohibit what they viewed as offensive hate speech. In RAV versus City of St. Paul, 1992, a St. Paul, Minnesota ordinance made it a crime to engage in speech or act likely to arouse anger, alarm, or resentment on the basis of race, color, creed, religion, or gender when that was an issue. The court ruled 5-4 that a white teenager who burned a cross on a black family's front lawn thereby committing a hate crime under the ordinance of the city, could not be charged under that law because the First Amendment prevents governments from silencing speech on the basis of its content. Now, in 2003, another case came before the court, and they narrowed that, okay? So when they narrowed it, they came down to basically what they said, imminent danger, okay? So if the hate speech is one that's intentionally making an attempt to cause imminent danger or imminent violence, then that can be restricted. But just saying I don't like or whatever, or others. Now remember, symbols are included in this. So a flag, an armband, burning a cross, all those are symbols. So that's still protected under freedom of speech, according to those, until 2003. So if, for example, I know that it's going to offend you to the point to where it could be violent, and I walk up to you and do it anyway, then I'm basically assaulting you, and you have a right to defend yourself. So that's where that freedom of speech carries some limitations. So then we get into unprotected speech and press. So the unprotected speech and press, of course, is libel and slander. And the New York Times Company versus Sullivan in 1964 was the first major libel case considered by the Supreme Court. An Alabama state court found the Times guilty of libel for printing a full-page advertisement accusing Alabama officials of physically abusing African Americans during various civil rights protests. The Supreme Court overturned the conviction and established the finding of libel against a public official could stand only if there was a showing of actual malice. So, and then we're going to get into the 1942 case of that imminent danger, those fighting words. We put those two together, right? We talked about the imminent danger in 1973. Now we're going to go back and redefine fighting words. In the 1942 case of Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, the court stated that fighting words, and this is bolded like you would not believe, or words that by their very utterance inflict injury or tend to incite an immediate breach of peace are not subject to the provisions of the First Amendment. Fighting words, which may include profanity, obscenity, and threats, are therefore able to be regulated by the federal and state governments. So now we had to come back later and define what are obscenities. And basically, we've done away with the definition of obscenities. If you go back to George Carlin had a fantastic comedy routine on the 13 unspeakable words, the words we weren't allowed to say in public, right? But it's something else. Let me catch up on my on the chat here. I will try to buy it. I'll try to find it for you, Jack. Wait 1 second. Let me get this up here. Let me see if I can't find it here. I'll get out of YouTube. And Izzy, you're just going to have to stay there, sweetheart. I'm sorry. Okay. U.S. corporations, Supreme Court, Obama. I'm looking it up here for you real quick, Jack. Let me see. I put in U.S. corporations, Supreme Court, Obama. Okay, it's 2010. Supreme Court's 5-4 decision. Okay, so here's the article. Okay, where is my StreamYard? There we go. Here's StreamYard. Okay, here's the link to, and I didn't even read it to get the name of the decision. Let me get back here. Where is it? Citizens United. That's it. Citizens United. Okay. Okay, so we just did, now we're in fighting words and then obscenities. And Richard M. Nixon made the growth of pornography a major issue when he ran for president in 1968. He pledged to appoint a federal judgeship only to those who would uphold the law on pornography. And then that took its course, and then we had some other things that happened. We had where originally it was just that Playboy only exposed from the waist up, and then it was from the back, and then finally somewhere in the mid 70s, I guess it was full body nudity. Then I forget the guy's name or the name of the magazine. Larry Flint was the guy, and he got shot. But anyhow, he came out with a magazine where, he got really raunchy, and they said that due to the new Supreme Court decision on what was obscenity and what was not, that it was not against the law. So, but he had a really obnoxious, I consider it pornographic. So that's kind of where we are. That's as much as I wanted to get into this evening, discussing all that down through obscenity. And let's see where you are and see if we can clarify anything that I may have confused you on, or I may have confused myself on. So, Sumi, there you are. Good evening. Welcome. Good to see you. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Wow, we're a little early, 41 minutes. Let me see. Do we want to keep on going? I haven't prepared this next part, but we can definitely keep on going. We pretty much talked about all of those, so I'm going to. Here's interesting. The Supreme Court and right to privacy. In 1965, Griswold versus Connecticut, the right to privacy is explained by the court and used to justify striking down a Connecticut statute prohibiting married couples access to birth control. Pay attention, okay? Because you're going to be surprised. A decision that you think was a decision about what it has grown to be was not. It's going to be covered here as we talk about rights to privacy. And I was just reminded when I looked at the Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965. So then we had another major decision on rights to privacy, and that was in 1973 in a decision called Roe versus Wade. And the Supreme Court found that a woman has a right to an abortion without her spouse's or the father's consent. So this was not necessarily that whether abortion was legal or not. It was, do you have to have the other party's consent in order to do it? And so that grew, okay? The original discussion was only about privacy, and that's where you get the whole thing, the mantra we hear today, my body, my right. And so it was, you have the right to make your own decision, yes, without the other person having any say in it, was what the Supreme Court decision was. Then in 1980, Harris versus McRae, the court upheld that the Hyde Amendment, ruling that federal funds cannot be used to pay for poor women's abortions. So there was a moral issue around whether or not a fetus is a human being. And so there was a bill, the Hyde Amendment, and it said, okay, we will allow abortion as long as federal funds, tax dollars, people who object to abortion, as long as their contributions are not used to pay for an abortion. Okay, so that's the Hyde Amendment. In 1986, Bowers versus Hardwick, the court upheld Georgia's sodomy law, finding that gay men and lesbians have no privacy rights. That was later overturned here in Texas, a case that originated here in Texas. So 1989, Webster versus Reproductive Health Services, the court comes close to overruling Roe v. Wade and invites states to fashion abortion restrictions based upon their people's desires. Remember that? Demos kratos. Demos, the people, kratos, decide, or the rule of the people. And that's the whole thing on the Dobbs decision. So most people say, doing away with the Roe, the Dobbs decision, what it did was it returned, just as we tried to do in 89, with the Webster versus Reproductive Health Services, returned the right of the decision-making back to the states so that the people have the power to decide whether or not that state is going to participate or not participate in that function. Okay. 1992, Planned Parenthood of Southeastern Pennsylvania versus Casey. By the narrowest of margins, the court limits Roe by abolishing its trimester approach. So what happened was Roe v. Wade originally was interpreted that it could only take place during the first trimester. And then in this one, in Planned Parenthood of Southeastern Pennsylvania versus Casey, it was decided that it could, if it were going to happen, it could happen at any time. 2003, the one I just told you about, Lawrence versus Texas, in overruling the Bowers that said that, homosexuals, whether it be male or female, had no right to privacy in 2003. So basically, if you did it in the privacy of your own home, we don't care about it. Just don't do it in public. Then in 2003, they said, no, that's wrong. In Lawrence versus Texas, the court overruled Bowers for the first time and concluded that the right to privacy applies to homosexuals and lesbians as well. So that basically opened up the whole thing for the legitimacy of gay marriage. Okay, and so up until 2003, gay marriage was illegal, and in almost every state. And then the Supreme Court in 2003, with the Lawrence versus Texas, opened it up and made it where it was recognized. In 2007, Gonzalez versus Carhart, the Supreme Court upheld the Federal Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act. So, a lot of difficult subjects there that have been very controversial over the past couple decades, I guess, and it's kind of changed our society as we've gone along. So somebody had asked me if I would talk about, do a video on where we have traversed as far as being a country where we separated those things that were religious in nature versus those things. I took a nap in my eyebrow. It looks like a horn from the devil. But if I would talk about where we originally had things separated, and the church had its functions, and then the government had its functions. And so, and I'm going to say something probably very controversial that a lot of you may not agree with, but I think one of our worst presidents was FDR, because nobody has done more to socialize, communize the United States than FDR did. And, a lot of historians say that a lot of the things that he did, the AAA, all these different acts that he did, were totally unconstitutional. There is no provision, for example, authorizing, there's no, if you look at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution as being the only things the government is allowed to do, there's nothing in there that authorizes Social Security. Okay, so that is basically unconstitutional. The only other thing they're allowed to do outside of Article 1, Section 8 is the 16th Amendment, which is income tax. So, hello, Blossom, welcome. That's another new name. Glad that you could join us. So, if we take a look at where we were when the country was formed, marriage licenses were kept in the family Bible. Okay. Another thing I need for you to remember is when we were first formed, back in the 1700s, up and even, gosh, I'm going to say probably up even until the late 19th, 30th, 20th century, we did not have a very high, literacy rate. I mean, the literacy rate at the beginning of the 20th century was in the 20s, in the 20th percentile. So, we did not have really good literacy until, I'm going to say probably during the Great Depression, just around that time. And we don't even have a great literacy rate right now. Our educational system is really going defunct. Education was handled primarily by the church. Remember that the first primers were actually religious primers. Most of the schools in Europe were run by Catholic nuns and priests, the Jesuits especially, the Franciscans were the primary educators. Then we got into public schools, started becoming popular in the 70s, 1880s, we had a lot of public schools. So as we started establishing the public schools, they had to tax in order to fund them. And so if you were going to pay taxes for a school, you figured you wanted to, hi Shenanigans, welcome, I'm glad you're here. So when that happened, you had to, if you were taxed for it, you wanted to send your kids where you're paying the money for. So that's why now the school vouchers thing is becoming such an important issue, is because the mindset is, I go where my money goes. I'm going to send my children where I'm paying. So if I have to pay taxes for a public school and pay private tuition for a private school, I'm going to go ahead and save my money with the private school. Marriage is a religious term. The government secular term would be agreement or union. Civil union is correct. By no standards can a religious term be used for non-religious contracts, but it is here in the States. So what happened was, after the Civil War, and I forget the name of the town, it's a little town in Kansas right outside of Wichita, there was a black man who wanted to marry a white woman. And they said, you can't do that because you have to have a license. And they controlled issuing the license. So marriage licenses, and that's what it was called here in the States, were issued as a form of racial discrimination. They were not issued for a sacrament. They were issued as a form of racial discrimination. Well, they charged, every time you get a license, you got to have a license application fee, right? So they charged for that license application fee. And so other cities and municipalities and counties and states saw that, hey, we can make money by issuing licenses. So then starting in about 1875 and on, what you saw was a lot of the marriages were starting to happen inside the government institutions, because they could make money by issuing the licenses. Now, another thing they did was they controlled it. For example, when I got married in 1970, we had to have proof that we were free of venereal disease in order to get a marriage license from the county. So we had to go down and have a blood test before we could get married. So, and that's been done away with since then. But, that's one case is marriage licenses. Another case is determining the age of marriage and things like that. Louisiana still has the youngest age in the U.S., and it's 14 with parental consent. Most other states are 16 with parental consent, some are 18, but the age of majority becomes an issue here. There's so many different ages of majority depending on what you're talking about. You can drink in some states at 18, but you can't smoke in any state because it's a federal law until you're 21, or use tobacco products. You can get married in most states with parental consent at 16, except Louisiana, which is 14, 16 without parental consent, 18 in other states. You have to be 21 to smoke. You have to be 21 to purchase a weapon, except long arms can be purchased at 18, 18 to vote. But there's so many different things. I'm old enough and mature enough to vote, but I'm not old enough and mature enough to drink a glass of whiskey. So we've got lots of contradictions there. Another one is the church. The hospital systems and healthcare. So if you take a look at it, the Sisters of Charity was probably one of the greatest institutions as far as medical care in the United States. They ran most of the public hospitals. Sisters of Charity and Sisters of Mercy and St. Vincent de Paul ran a lot of the hospitals and healthcare organizations and doctor training and everything else in the U.S. up until after the Civil War. And then the U.S. government got into it. And of course, that was because primarily of the mass casualties that we had during the Civil War. And there wasn't anybody trained to take care of that. So then you had institutions of higher learning. Those institutions of higher learning, the colleges and universities started issuing doctor's licenses. So that kind of went away from the religious centers who did the primary care there over into the state and state licensing and everything else. So we've got marriage, we've got birth records, we've got divorce, we've got healthcare, orphanages. Let's go back to Numbers, the book of Numbers, and I believe it's chapter 14 in the book of Numbers, where we talk about the tithe. So it's the first mention of the tithe in the Old Testament. And so, they say that specifically you have to give 10% of your income to the temple, to the tribe of Levi. And that money was specifically designed to do three things, okay? It was specifically designed, number one, the tribe of Levi had no land, had no jobs. They were strictly to service the temple, okay, or to service the tent of meeting, the Ark of the Covenants. And so they didn't have any form of income. So they relied on the other 11 tribes to provide them with income. The second one was for widows, and the third one was to maintain orphanages. And so that has been historically what tithing was used for: the priesthood, orphanages, and taking care of widows. And then we saw that kind of start slipping away in the 1920s and 1930s. Probably the most famous orphanage is Father Flanagan's Boys Town in Iowa. And that's one of the last religious organizations as far as orphanages that I'm aware of here in the United States. There may be others, but that's the last one I'm aware of. Yeah, absolutely. And my interpretation, Jack, is we are going the way of the manifesto. Remember that religion is the opiate of the people. So the more that the government can take religion away from, or at least the religious sacraments, obligations, and kindnesses and charities that religion has done historically, and put it in the hands of the government, the less dependent people are going to be upon religion. And I think that's the transition that we're seeing, is that let's get away from religion and more towards the sanctity of the government. Exactly. The Red Cross was basically, the International Red Cross, at least, was originally a religious organization. The same thing with the Green Crescent, which is the Muslim equivalent to the Red Cross. So both of those were religious organizations. Yep. Let me see. Okay, gosh, you guys, I love you guys. You do such a fantastic job of helping each other and keeping me straight, like Theoxerus did. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely, and shenanigans, I'm going to say absolutely. But it's gotten to the point now to where we have allowed the government to take it away. Remember that there is nowhere in the Constitution, and there's nowhere in the Declaration of Independence, there's nowhere in in a bill that says that there is separation of church and state. Okay. That question was asked by the First Baptist Church of Danbury, Connecticut, of President Thomas Jefferson. And he responded to that letter, and his letter is dated January 1st, 1803, and he responded to that letter. Now, the Baptists in Connecticut thought that they were being persecuted by the Quakers, okay? And they wanted government intervention to protect them and guarantee them their freedom of religion. And President Jefferson said, I can't do that. I can't use military U.S. government forces to intervene in religious disputes. Okay, there is an inseparable wall between religion and government. That's where that quote comes from. So, but we have used it now to say we cannot use religion as a means of making a decision. That actually comes from the Johnson Act. Let me look that up here for you, which is Lyndon Baines Johnson. Johnson Act of 1934. There we go. So it's the Johnson Act of 1934. So what happened was LBJ was running for office, and he asked his church to endorse him. And up until that time, politics were freely discussed in churches. That was. If you take a look at our revolution, the vast majority of the revolutionaries met, congregated, and assembled and planned at churches. That's how we got our freedom. And then, but in 1934, because LBJ could not receive the endorsement of his church. He says, I'll get you. When he got into the Congress, he wrote the Johnson Act, and he says, if you promote or refuse to promote if you discuss politics from the pulpit, we will take away your tax exempt status. So that's what happened is now they don't discuss politics or morality in politics today simply because they could lose their tax exempt status. Let me see. Yes, and so basically, what has happened, Jack, is here they have taken that and misconstrued it from freedom of religion to freedom from religion. So there's a lot of things that in God We Trust is one of them. It's the U.S. government motto. Then of course you have the national anthem. They added in the One Nation Under God. I'm sorry, the Pledge of Allegiance, One Nation Under God. There's a lot of religion. Here's the thing, okay? When we wrote the Constitution was written with one underlying assumption, and that is that men would be honest, God-fearing men and make moral decisions. And we are rapidly evolving away from that, okay? And so that's, just something. So Jack mentioned something. He mentioned one of my pet peeves. Probably get in trouble for this because, for those of you who don't know, I was raised Catholic. My dad was Protestant. I left and went with him, and I became a 32nd degree Mason for 40 years. And so there's a lot of stuff that is taught, a lot of things that are said about the Masons that I never saw as one of the highest ranking people in the in Freemasonry for almost 40 years that I have not seen that they have been accused of. So let me start. The thing was, do you believe in the Creator as the Freemasons do? So this is Symbolium Apostolorum. Credo in Deum Patrem Omnipotentem, Creatorem Caeli et Terrae. And if you translate that into English, it is, I believe in God the Father, creator of heaven and earth, creator of heaven and earth. So that's the exact same thing. Exact same thing. The difference between the Catholic Church and Freemasons is Freemasons use a King James Bible instead of the Bible that we use. They took out the Septuagint, but I'm sorry, but that's just speaking from experience, just giving you my experience and my knowledge. There's a lot of false accusations, not only from Catholics, but also from others. Baptists are good at it as well. What can they do, Stray Kitten? That would be the question I would ask, other than, vote. And amen. Love it, Shenanigans. Way to go. The U.S. and Australia and Canada and the U.K. were founded upon Christian morals. Fact. What did the founding fathers mean with God? In my opinion, they meant Jehovah, as the nation was built upon his laws. Absolutely. I'm unaware of that, but yeah, it would not surprise me. Okay, so we are now at 1 minute or 1 hour and 5 minutes. Anything else that? I got in trouble at the church because I'm not defending them, other than the fact that I'm just saying that in my 40 years I never saw the accusations, and so they could be there. There's a lot of things that could be happening that are outside my field of vision. I'm not saying they don't happen. I'm just saying I never saw them happen. I never saw a lot of the things that a lot of Christians, especially fundamentalist Christians and Catholics, say. So just my experience, for what it's worth. They could have refused to shut up about politics, yeah, and lost their tax-exempt status, which basically is their charter to work. Yep. Well, thank you, Shenanigans. Okay, so I think it's Numbers 14 where we talk about the tithe. But anyhow, let's go to Numbers 6. And we'll close this out the normal way. And number 6 chapter 6, verses 24, 25, and 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you, and the Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. We will be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. And we've got 4 exciting things going on here. I've got some exciting stuff that I'll be talking about as well on preparedness, which is where we really want to focus our channel. I'm probably going to be adding another night where we do some training, and that's going to be basically because of the vast number of people who are just now coming into prepping. I think they need some good, solid discussion around what to do so that they don't get, there's all kinds of bad information out there, and there's people who make assumptions. And, so I value you people. I know your experience. I know your knowledge level. So please join me with that, because I think one of the things we need to do is start talking about prepping from the start, from simple things like, okay, what do you perceive as being your biggest threats? Because what you perceive as being your biggest threat is going to guide you in the direction of, are you a bug out person, a hunker down person? That's going to guide you in what your priorities as far as what you prepare for, training, equipment, stockpiling, things like that. So all these decisions have these little forks on this tree, and you encounter these forks that you as you go along your prepping journey. So how do we guide people in the right direction so that they can have a better opportunity to survive? And I value your opinion, and I really would like to have you as part of that too. Tell me in the comments after this is all over, and you go back and review this on the comments. Tell me what night you think would be the best night available for us to have a 1-hour discussion on introduction to prepping. Okay, so let me see. We've got some Triple G. Thank you, sir. And Jack, I hope I didn't offend you. I'm sorry. And good night, Lee. East Tennessee. Is he in here? I didn't see him. I'm sorry. What a great guy. Join his channel as well. East Tennessee Preparedness. We need to build his up as well. Okay. Remember, we're all in this together, so we can come out the other side together. Please be kind, polite, and respectful to each other. You guys do such a fantastic job in chat. Thank you so much, because we're going to get through this together, and we're going to come out the other side. And remember, I think we're in biblical times, and I think you need to make sure that you're right with your salvation, that you know what's going to happen to your soul, not just your body, but your soul, because I really believe we are in the ultimate fight of good versus evil. And, you've got to make sure you're on the right side. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being here, and wish you a blessed and protected night. Bye-bye.